For most of human history, when the sun went down, the world ended. Not metaphorically, functionally. You could not read, you could not work, you could not see the person sitting across from you unless they were close enough to touch. The streets of every city on Earth were, for half of every day, completely black. This was not a hardship people complained about. It was the shape of life. You woke when it was light, you ate when it was light, you worked when it was light, and then, without ceremony, the lights went out because there were no lights to go out. The body adjusted. People slept in 2 shifts with a quiet hour of wakefulness in the middle of the night called the watch. Conversations happened in the dark. Children were conceived in the dark. Bones were set in the dark. Wars were stopped every single day because nobody could see who they were fighting. This was the rule for roughly 200,000 years. Then somebody noticed that fire makes light. Fire had been useful to humans for almost 2 million years before anyone thought of it as light. It was a heater, a cook, a predator deterrent. Light was a side effect, and a useful one, but not the point. That changed when humans started building shelters. Inside a cave or a hut, fire became the only thing that pushed back the dark. The hearth, the central fireplace of a home, was, for most of human history, the only meaningful indoor light source. You did everything within reach of it. Cooked, I ate, mended clothes, told stories, slept around it. This is why every old language has so many words for fire. It wasn't decoration. It was the room. A hearth also had to be tended. Fires go out. If yours did, you walked to your neighbor's house with a clay pot, scooped some embers, and walked back. Whole towns kept a perpetual fire going in a central building precisely so nobody would lose theirs. The Romans had professional fire tenders called vestals, whose job was to keep one fire alive forever. Forever ended a few thousand years later when fire stopped being the only option. The first portable light was a rock with a wick in it. About 70,000 years ago, somebody figured out that animal fat, when soaked into plant fiber and lit, would burn slowly and brightly. The earliest oil lamps are scoops carved into stone. A hollow, a piece of moss, a smear of fat. Light you could carry. The improvements were not dramatic. For 60,000 years, the design stayed the same. Container, oil, wick. The container got nicer, clay, then bronze, then brass. The oil got cleaner, olive, sesame, walnut. The wick got better, twisted linen instead of moss. But the basic idea did not change. These lamps were small and weak. A single oil lamp produces about as much light as a candle, which is roughly 1/100th of a modern light bulb. To read by one, you had to sit close enough that the page nearly touched your nose. Wealthy households used dozens of them at once. A scribe copying a manuscript at night was working in a swarm of tiny flames. And they smoked. Animal fat lamps in particular gave off a thick, greasy soot that coated every surface in the room. The walls, the ceiling, the inside of your lungs. Some of the most famous ancient frescoes are dark, not because they faded, but because they were buried under 300 years of indoor lamp soot. Bright rooms were a problem. Dim, smoky rooms were the answer. Around 5,000 years ago, somebody figured out you could skip the container entirely. The candle is a portable wick standing in solid fuel. This is a deceptively clever invention. Oil lamps need a container, they spill, they tip over, they require careful handling. A candle is just the fuel itself, shaped into a stick, with a wick down the middle. You can put it in your pocket. Candles were made of whatever fat was around. In Europe, that was tallow, rendered beef or mutton fat. Tallow candles were affordable, but they smelled terrible. They smoked. The fat went rancid in storage. Most peasants in medieval Europe lit their evenings with what was, essentially, slow-burning meat. The rich used beeswax. Beeswax burns cleaner, brighter, longer, and smells faintly sweet. It was also about 100 times more expensive than tallow because beeswax is harvested from beehives one comb at a time. To light a single evening dinner party with beeswax candles was a flex equivalent to today's private jet. Churches insisted on beeswax for the altar, partly because of the cleaner light, partly because nobody wanted services to smell like burnt mutton. There was also a third option for the very rich, spermaceti. This was the waxy substance found in the skull of a sperm whale. It made the cleanest, brightest, whitest candle ever invented. It also required killing a sperm whale. For 3 centuries, that is what people did. In 1712, a Massachusetts whaler caught a sperm whale by accident. He had been hunting smaller whales. The sperm whale was bigger, harder to kill, and considered too dangerous. But once he had it, somebody noticed the head was full of a clean, wax-like oil that burned beautifully. Within a generation, the entire American economy had reorganized itself around sperm whales. Sperm whale oil was the best light fuel ever discovered up to that point. It was clean, it was bright, it was odorless. It made the candle obsolete in the homes that could afford it. Street lamps in London, Paris, Boston, and New York were filled with whale oil. Lighthouses ran on whale oil. The factories of the early Industrial Revolution kept their machines running through the night on whale oil. The whaling industry became, briefly, one of the largest economies in the world. Nantucket, Massachusetts, a small island town, was for a few decades among the wealthiest places per capita on Earth. There were entire fleets of ships, sometimes gone for 3 years at a time, that existed only to catch animals and turn them into light. By 1846, the United States alone was killing about 10,000 whales a year. The North Atlantic sperm whale population dropped by roughly 2/3 in less than a century. Then somebody noticed there was oil under the ground. In 1853, a Polish chemist named Ignacy Lukasiewicz distilled crude petroleum into a clean burning fuel and lit a lamp with it. He called it kerosene. Kerosene was 1/10 of the price of whale oil and burned almost as cleanly. Within 20 years, the whaling industry collapsed. The whales had not been saved by anyone trying to save them. They had been saved by a cheaper alternative. Kerosene was not the end of the story. While oil lamps got better, an entirely separate technology had been quietly developing for decades. In the 1790s, a Scottish engineer named William Murdoch had lit his house with gas piped through tubes from a small coal-burning furnace in his garden. By the 1820s, entire London streets were lit by gas. Cities started laying gas mains under the cobblestones. For the first time in human history, light was a thing that arrived through a pipe. Gas was bright. It was always on. It changed when cities worked, how people ate, what hours theaters could keep, when shops could open. The phrase burning the midnight oil stopped being a stretch, because midnight no longer meant oil. And then, on October 21st, 1879, in a small lab in Menlo Park, New Jersey, a man named Thomas Edison held up a glass bulb with a carbonized cotton thread inside it. He flipped a switch. The bulb glowed for 13.5 hours. The hearth had lasted about 2 million years. The oil lamp lasted 70,000. The candle lasted 5,000. Whale oil lasted 300. Gas lasted about 90. The light bulb was 40 years old when it had already replaced all of them. The sun had finally been beaten.